Hello, so now today we're going to actually start to look at some of this climate data in the reanalysis. Essentially we're going to be looking at how to access the ERA5 reanalysis and through the web interface. So what we're going to do is we're going to open a browser first of all. So I'm using the Chrome browser on my Mac laptop, so you can open Chrome or Firefox, any browser that you want to use for this exercise. And I want you to basically go to the Copernicus website, which I will put the address in a banner at the bottom here, but it's cds.climate.copernicus.eu. Okay, so we've got this additional /home here, but you see that it just comes up automatically. So you should see a page like this, which you have the banners across the top of the European Union who are funding this development. There's Copernicus, ECMWF, and this is under the auspices of their climate change services. Now, if you notice, before I go into the details, at the top right of this page, you'll see that we have a button that says log in or register right here. So if you click on that before we start, you'll see now they've got a login page, and I've already saved my login email address and my password. But for you, those of you that haven't used this service before, you'll need to click on this tab here now, create new account. And you'll be faced with a page here with information that you have to enter. So your email address you want to use to access the system, your name, surname, country, and sector, okay, organization. So there's not much information they need to use here. You might want to read the terms and conditions about how the data is permitted to be used. So after you've done this, you only need to do this once, obviously, to set up an account. You won't need to do it again and to have free access to this data. So once you've done that, and confirmed, you should get an email that arrives in your inbox as usual for this kind of like registration, which you need to click to confirm your email address, and then you'll be able to in future log in. So here I'm just going to click on login. So you might need to wait 1 or 2 minutes to get the email. Okay, so pause the video until you have that set up. So once you're logged in, instead of having the login button here, you should be successfully logged in. You'll see your name displayed on the top right corner here. So once you've done that, we're going to start to dig into some of the data sets, okay? So I'm only going to scrape the surface. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive straight into the database, which on this menu across the top here, we'll see that we actually have the third from the left, we have datasets. So I'm going to click on that. And now we get this page, which has basically a search button. Okay, and then on the left we have a menu, a list of drop-down menus that we're going to come to in a moment. And we basically have a list of all the data sets. We can scroll down and you'll see there's a large number of very diverse data sets here, okay? So we're not going to be able to go through all of this. This list is growing all the time as new data sets are added for various different climate sectors and services, some of which you might find very interesting, so I invite you to browse through these. We want to go for the basic ERA5 reanalysis that we discussed in the last lecture. So if I click on the left-hand menu here that says product type, okay, this will help us reduce this menu of options here to something that's a little bit shorter. So if we drop this down, we'll see that there's a number of different choices we can make. There's climate indices, climate projections, external services, in situ observations, reanalysis, and satellite observations, and seasonal forecasts that we're going to talk about in part 2 of this course. So for the moment, what I want you to do is click on reanalysis, where we'll see that of these data sets, 21 are actually classified as reanalysis, which means they're either directly the reanalysis or they are downstream products that have been derived using reanalysis data. So if we click on that, we'll find now that we still have a rather long list, but it's shorter than before. So for example, this is an example of a downstream product, thermal comfort indices derived from ERA5 reanalysis. But what we want to do is use some of the direct ERA5 data. So you'll see that some of these data sets start with ERA5, and the difference is they're all from the same underlying data set, but some of them have been, for example, aggregated over periods of time, such as we have monthly average data here. And you'll notice that we have basically two types of, shall we say, locations in the atmosphere which the data is available. Okay, so the first type is data that's available on pressure levels. Okay, so we have slices through the atmosphere at constant pressure. The data has been interpolated from the original model levels of the actual simulation grid onto, should we say, isobaric lines of constant pressure. Okay, so on pressure levels, or we can have basically data that's not a function of height and therefore is data that's available on single levels. So here we have monthly average data on single levels. Okay, so single levels is usually referring to data at the surface, such as the temperature at 2 meters height. Okay, but it can also be data that's available at the top of the atmosphere. So, for example, top of the atmosphere radiation fluxes, infrared fluxes, solar fluxes, and so on. Okay. If we scroll down, we'll see lower down in that list, we also have some ERA5 products that are available at much higher temporal resolution, so hourly data. So if you're interested in daily averages of data and so on, you're going to have to use hourly data because there are only two levels of temporal aggregation. There's the hourly available data or data that's been aggregated up to monthly timescales. There's not directly available a daily average data. Okay, so if you want daily data, you need to take the hourly output and actually aggregate it yourself offline. And we're going to be showing you how to do that in the next lecture. So just as an example here, I'm going to click on ERA5 hourly data on single levels from 1979 till the present. Okay. So if we click on that, you should be on a page that looks like this, where it says ERA5 hourly data on single levels from 1979 until the present. And underneath that, you'll see that there are a number of menus: overview, download data, quality assessment, documentation, and view. Now, if you're unfamiliar with all the intricacies of the ERA5 reanalysis, I do think it's worth time having a look through some of this documentation because it will really enable you to appreciate some of the limitations of the data, some of the strengths of the data, how it's created, and so on. So there's a lot more detail available in some of this documentation that I was able to actually cover in my last lecture. So you see we've got an overview of the data here, and then there's some data tables at the bottom, and these are particularly useful. So you've got a list here of the variables that are available within the data set, and in this table as well there are the units. So if you're ever confused about what the units are of the variable that you're looking at, although we'll see they're actually stored in the file themselves, and again in the next lecture we'll see how to see that information in the metadata, it's called. And then there's a description of the parameter. So it's very well documented, and you'll see here there's even more detailed documentation more generally about ERA5 documentation online. So we're going to move on quickly though. I'll leave you as an exercise to look through some of that documentation. And we'll see here that there's a tab, download data. So we'll go straight to that. So I'm on download data under ERA5 hourly data on single levels from 1979 until the present. So make sure that your screen is showing the same information and that you haven't accidentally clicked on the monthly data instead of the hourly data. What you'll see then if you do that is we have a number of these boxes which we're going to go through quickly in turn. So on the top we've got reanalysis, or ensemble members, or ensemble mean, or ensemble spread. So if you recall in the last lecture we talked about the fact that now ERA5 is not just a single analysis, but it tries to account for the uncertainty of the analysis by actually having several different, should we say, analyses, possible, say, manifestations of what the atmosphere is doing to have an assessment of the analysis uncertainty. For the moment though, we're going to restrict ourselves at the beginning of just the basic unperturbed analysis, so the reanalysis product. So for most people this will be sufficient compared to, for example, forecast errors and so on, that these analysis differences are actually quite small. But you can, if you're interested, you can have a look at these as well to have an idea of what the uncertainty in the analysis is with your particular variable. What we're going to do next then is have a look at which variables to download. Now, you have a lot of drop-down bars here that try to group the parameters in categories of retrieval, which are fairly self-explanatory. So we have precipitation and rain categories, and so you can see that you have, for example, the total precipitation, or you can have it divided into the convection parameterization schemes, rain rate, and then the large-scale rain rate, and so on. And if we look at clouds, you'll see that these are all variables that are related to the clouds in the column of the reanalysis. We've got the cloud base height, the low cloud cover, total cloud cover, and so on. Okay. For your convenience, obviously from experience with how the system is used, there are a number of these variables which basically are very commonly used, and so these are say put into a separate table at the top here in order to make access to these very, very fast. So we have the 10 meter wind on the U component, the 10 meter V component, the 2 meter dew point temperature, the 2 meter temperature, and so on. I'll let you read through those. So these are variables which are very commonly downloaded, and so you've got this kind of quick access here. Okay. So in fact, for this first exercise, we're going to pick the reanalysis, and then with this checkbox, we're going to click on the 2 meter temperature. Okay, just to start us off. If you want, you can actually select more variables, but obviously it increases the file size afterwards. Now, one thing I should say actually, when we get down to these last boxes here, so this is now we're starting to look at the dates, is there is a limit to the amount of data you can get in one request using the web interface. So what that means is that often you might find you need to break down your requirements into several smaller jobs. Now, that means, if you're using the web interface, a lot of clicking and so on. And so what we'll find later is it's actually most convenient to use the API, okay? So you can actually retrieve the data directly to your laptop using a little script in Python. So we're going to come to that in a future lesson. So the website is good for investigating the data and maybe getting 1 or 2 quick downloads of data to enable you to try an idea out. But if you really want to get a lot of data, you don't want to be using the web interface. Eventually you want to be writing an API-based script, which we're going to cover in a future lesson. So what have we got so far? We've got reanalysis, 2 meter temperature, and then lower down here we have to actually specify the dates. And again, this is fairly self-explanatory. We have a number of years here. The reanalysis now goes back to 1979, so it covers the same period as ERA interim. Okay, that was the predecessor of ERA5. I believe the plan is actually in the future to start extending this back further into the past. Now, one of the problems of that, of course, is when you start to go back before the 1980s, there's very little satellite information available. So from the 1960s and earlier than that, you really only have the conventional observations, if you remember from my first lecture, of radiosondes and in situ ground-based data. And so that means that it gets a little bit more difficult analyzing trends when the data information that's ingested into the system changes over time. Okay, so most analysis systems like ERA interim and this actually start from 1979. So for this, we can see it goes up to 2020. It's not up to real time. So if we click on 2020, we'll find that it's used a little tiny bit behind real time, but it's not too bad now. It keeps fairly up to date. So I'm clicking on October now. We're currently on the 23rd, and we can see we've got available data up until the 18th of this month. So it's only about 4 or 5 days behind real time now, which is actually very, very good indeed. In the past, there would be a much larger lag. This also shows another aspect of this system which is quite nice, in that if you notice when I make choices, if there's an option in a table that's incompatible with another one, so now I've got 2019 and 2020, I've got all of the months which are dark and clickable. When I only have 2020, if you notice, November and December have disappeared because obviously they're in the future, the data is not available then. So the system prevents you from making choices which are not compatible with the data that's online. But obviously, if we try and download November and we click 29 and 2020, now 2020 is not available for November and it disappears. On the other hand, if I click May, when we actually have both months. So now if I choose these 2 months, 2019, 2020, May and November, of course the retrieval will only cover 3 of those 4 possible months because November is only valid for 2019 and not for 2020. So you don't always get what you expect from the combination of all the tables, as you can see, but it's very, very helpful nevertheless that you have these options that are whited out. So we'll just pick up 1 month of data just for this very first initial test. So we take 2020, I'm picking May now, if you notice. Days, well, we can actually take all the days, and you notice that instead of clicking all the days like this, we have these buttons here like select all, which enables to very quickly select all of the days here. And if you recall, the data is hourly, so we have another table here that enables us to actually select specific hours. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to again select all of the hours. So we've got all of the hours for all of the days of May 2020 for the 2-meter temperature. Now here we have the geographical area. Now in the web interface this has been recently added. In the past it was only possible to get global data through this and so if you're only interested in having data for a sub-region, you can click on this and actually cut down the area, which of course will drastically reduce your file sizes depending on what the size of the sub-region is, obviously. So you can use that as well. For the moment, I'm just going to try and click this for the whole region. And last but not least, we have the format of the output. So we have GRIB and netcdf. Okay, so this is the format of the output. Now, you might not all be familiar with this kind of data outputs. Basically, both of these are self-describing files, and I'm going to be talking about that kind of file in the next lecture when we start to analyze the data. Okay, GRIB was traditionally used in operational weather forecasting, and netcdf was a file, should we say, self-describing file type that's more generally used for climate. So we're going to click on netcdf, and at the bottom here then we have terms of use with a license agreement. Now, if you're using it for the first time, this won't be ticked, okay, and you will have to click to read the terms of how the data can be used, which I think has conditions such as you're not allowed to sell the data and make profits from the data without the explicit permission, I presume, of ECMWF. So you can read and view the terms and you have to click that. You only need to do that once and then they store it under your profile, and so in the future you'll find that this, it will be clicked for this particular data set. So if you use the seasonal forecast later, you'll need to also agree the license for that. And now I'm going to submit the form. So here we go. I submit the form. And then you should find that it goes to basically this screen here, where we have, this is my retrieval name, the submission date, okay, and then the duration, and it says in progress. So the system's going to the tapes now, and it's actually trying to, shall we say, pick this up. You could now, if you want, go back to the datasets page and actually choose a different, shall we say, dataset to download, and that will still be running in the background, okay, so it doesn't kill it off if you move away. And in fact, if you want to go back to that page and see how your retrieval is progressing, you'll notice 2 tabs to the right of datasets. You have your requests. You can click on this again, and we go back to that page, and you can see it's still in progress. Now, we have to wait a little while. It depends. There's a queue. You need to rise to the queue for it to be processed and to actually retrieve the data into a location where it can be downloaded. So you can see I've got an example here that's still stored in the cache that was actually requested a few days ago, and when it's ready you get a green download button just like this one here. So I'm going to leave it there for the moment. I want you to attempt to launch your own retrieval, and then when we come back in the next lecture we'll actually start to look at how to download and make a basic analysis and start to manipulate these files. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next lesson.